could read your thoughts. From the future.
The movies of 1985.
Hello, and welcome to the year 1985. It's week 29 of 1985. That's Tuesday the 16th of July to Monday the 22nd of July. My name is Jason Hutchins. I'm trapped 40 years ago in the middle of the best decade in human history. And in order to entertain myself, while I'm whiling away waiting for my escape, what I do is I pedal my bike to a local video store and rent a VHS videotape to watch. And I rent it based on a random number that comes out of a bingo machine, which I then look up on my Commodore 64 to see what movie that corresponds to. It's all a bit complicated, isn't it, when you say it out loud like that? But anyway, let's get the ball rolling, so to speak, with the bingo machine. Oh, you got stuck a bit there. This bingo machine's starting to give me a bit of worry. Anyway, that's number 47 that's come out. Number 47. Let me just press play on tape and have a look at what that is. So this is a Swedish movie, I think, and it is called My Life as a Dog. Now, I would have watched this in the 90s. When I was in my late teens, I would have said, probably on SBS, some Sunday afternoon or something like that. I don't know very much about it that I can remember, but we'll have a look, won't we? So I'm going to pedal over to Jumbo Video in Bicton because they have a pretty good international cinema section of their video store. While I do that, I'll flick on the TV and you can watch an ad.
Now there's an even more exhilarating Norska freshness, alive with the essence of pine, spruce, and birch. Feel it, as crisp as a mountain stream. Feel it in Norska antiperspirant, as cool and as clean as the Scandinavian air. Norska, more than ever before, the freshness of Scandinavia.
Okay, the freshness of Scandinavia. It's appropriate for this movie, I suppose. Now, I'm back from the video store with the VHS cassette in my hot little hand. Now, in the year 2025, you can rent this on Apple. In Australia, at least, you can. Now, this movie was not released in Australia. It didn't have a theatrical release in Australia until 1987. So it is quite remarkable that they had this video cassette in the store today. Now, looking at the cover, there's a photo of two young boys, I think, hugging each other, but they're in a boxing ring and they have boxing gloves on. And it says, "My Life as a Dog," a film by Lasse Hallström. And there's a quotation at the top saying, "I think about that guy who walked across the sports arena. He got a javelin right through the chest. He must have been very surprised." My Life as a Dog, the most surprising film of the year. Now, turning over to the back, there's a photograph of the young boy and a young girl next to him with her arm around his shoulder. There's a quote from the Sydney Morning Herald, one of the best films of the year, and the Times on Sunday, remarkable, a delight. And then there's a few more photographs of this young boy and a little blurb that says, "My Life as a Dog is one of the finest films on childhood, life and relationships seen in a long time. It's about growing up in Sweden in 1959 as seen through the eyes of a 10-year-old, Ingemar. Ingemar has to confront death, sex, soccer, girls, abandonment and guilt. And he also has to come with full glasses of milk, being beaten in the boxing ring by the girl he is smitten with." Oh, that must be the cover of the tape. "And his best friend's green hair. It's a simple tale of childhood that is just plain wonderful. My Life as a Dog." Director Lasse Hallström, and then it lists the stars, and I'm not going to do them a disservice by trying to pronounce their names, but there you go. I think it's time now to press play on tape and watch My Life as a Dog.
Sweden, 1959.
Jag tänker på den där killen jag läste om som skulle snedda över Johanneshovs idrottsplats. Han fick ju spjut genom bröstet. Rakt genom bröstet. Han måste ha blivit väldigt förvånad.
Ingemar Johansson and Floyd Patterson are contenders for the World Heavyweight Boxing title. Laika, the Russian space dog, is orbiting the Earth from the Sputnik satellite.
Henne stoppar de in i en Sputnik och skickar upp i rymden. För att ta reda på hur hon mådde skruvar de fast trådar till hjärnan och hjärtat. Jag tror inte hon mådde något vidare.
And 11-year-old Ingemar, he has a sick mother, a tormenting brother, a girlfriend who wants to be a boy, an uncle with a favorite record, an insatiable curiosity, a problem with milk, an unusual reading job, a neighbor who enjoys swimming in winter. 11-year-old Ingemar has his share of problems. But when all things are considered, not anywhere near as many as Laika orbiting the Earth. My Life as a Dog, the international movie success directed by Oscar nominee Lasse Hallström. My Life as a Dog, a very different kind of comedy you'll never forget.
Well, this movie was really good. I do remember watching it when I was much younger in the early 90s on SBS. It was better than what I was expecting it to be. So the director of this movie, Lasse Hallström, he was responsible for basically all of ABBA's music videos, and My Life as a Dog was his first movie that broke it big in America. What's interesting is this was released in Sweden in 1985, but wasn't released in Australia and the United States and the United Kingdom until 1987, where it became really popular, which is surprising for a foreign movie with subtitles. But it seemed to strike a nerve in all three countries, and it was nominated for 2 Oscars in 1988. As a direct result of the success of this movie, the director Lasse Hallström got a deal to direct some Hollywood movies. So he directed What's Eating Gilbert Grape, and also The Cider House Rules, which is a movie that we watched last year as part of the movies of 1999, as well as The Shipping News. Now, this movie is based on a series of semi-autobiographical novels by Rydar Johnson. There was a trilogy, in fact. The middle one in this series is called My Life as a Dog. And it is very much a coming-of-age movie. It's a 12-year-old boy or a 14-year-old boy who transforms from, a child who causes all sorts of problems at home into someone who's a bit more grown up by the end of the movie. As such, because it's an autobiographical movie, it's basically just a whole bunch of little stories, little vignettes that are strung together. What's also interesting about My Life as a Dog is it was a favourite of Kurt Vonnegut, the author, a favourite author of mine. It's filled with eccentric characters, and you can sort of see why Vonnegut might have liked it. It also reminded me of anime, like a lot of Studio Ghibli animes, for that reason, because it has this European setting. It's sort of set in the 50s. It's got eccentric characters. It's got a mad inventor in it. It has a very similar soundtrack to a lot of Ghibli movies. and it's heartfelt at the same time. So anyway, before I go into too much detail, let me just give you the first 20 minutes or so of this movie, which is 100 minutes long. So we start off with the Janus film logo and then fade into this idyllic beachside scene at sunset where the young boy, the star of the movie, Ingmar, is prancing around and making a fool of himself and basically making his mum laugh, distracting her from reading her book. She's a bit of a bookworm, and apparently he had to work hard to get her to pay attention to him. And he narrates it and says, I should have told her everything before it was too late, which is this is only the first 30 seconds, and that's a pretty great setup for a movie, isn't it? It's like the first line of a novel. We then see red credits against a black starry sky, just the standard 1985 film credits before all the action. And Ingmar again narrates, describing a few people and how they met their fate, their unfortunate end. So he's sort of fixated on this. He's always ruminating about all these tragedies that befall various people and comparing his life so far to their life, I think. And he finishes with the story of Laika, the dog that the Russians sent into space. And he seems quite transfixed by that. He has a dog himself, which comes into the story in a minute, but he's sort of staring up at this starry sky through the window on the ceiling of this small hut that's out in the backyard of his uncle's house. And it's covered in snow, and his uncle and aunt are trying to get him to open the door. And this is a foreshadowing for what happens towards the end of the movie. By this stage, we're only 2.5 minutes into the movie, and we've already seen these two moments that come back throughout the movie. One of the moments is he always comes back to this idyllic beachside scene when he's thinking about his mother. And then he always comes back to this scene where he's staring at the stars, where he's thinking about the fate that befalls various other people throughout history. We then cut to him in a little hideout underneath a railway where he's cutting his thumb so that he can marry a girl. She apparently has to lick the blood off his thumb. I'm not sure how that means that they're married, but that is just two young kids hanging out in this Swedish town, and they walk his dog back to their house. We see all these 1950s cars that sort of sets it in this period. And now we come to a part of the movie, which is the part that I always remember. They go back to his house, I think, and in the cellar, his brother is giving a little lecture to a bunch of kids describing how sex works, using a Coca-Cola bottle to demonstrate the female reproductive organs, I suppose. And Ingmar is called in to volunteer. And this is all a little bit dodgy, isn't it? Because he then gets a part of his anatomy stuck in the Coca-Cola bottle. So this is quite a funny scene, inappropriate, although though it might be. And later on we see him walking outside into the sunlight, and his mum is hanging out the washing, and she chastises him for doing something so silly. So word has spread around, but then she starts coughing up blood. So we see that she's suffering from TB, tuberculosis, and this is what will end up ending her life. Now that's a lot of stuff to take in, isn't it? And we're still only 7 minutes in, so it's really doing a good job of setting up a lot of interesting threads for us to follow throughout the rest of the movie. So in the next scene, his mother is bedridden, so this is maybe a little bit further on in time, and he and his brother are making breakfast for her, but doing a pretty bad job of it and burning the toast. And the scene hinges on the toast getting burnt because she has to come out of bed to put it in the bin, and she discovers evidence that Ingmar's been wetting the bed at night. So he causes all sorts of problems for his mum when she's suffering from TB. Her husband is off overseas picking bananas or something bizarre like this. So it really is a single mum household with these two sons that are constantly running amok and causing trouble for her. And throughout these scenes, we constantly flash back to the beachside scene and the starry night scene, as I described earlier. And Ringamar talks about how much he loves his dog, Sikan, almost as much as he loves his mum, he says. But even though he loves her, he annoys her a lot. And eventually she sends him away to live with his uncle and aunt, and his older brother goes off elsewhere to live with their grandmother. Meanwhile, the dog Sikan is put into a shelter, which we discover later on means that he's been put down. They've gotten rid of the dog. That becomes part of the story later on in the movie. But anyway, he arrives pretty much just a little bit after the 20-minute mark. He arrives by steam train to his uncle's village of Smallland, and this is where we start to meet all of these eccentric characters, along with the tomboy Saga, who will become a companion to Ingemar and an early love interest as well. Now, the eccentric village that reminded me a lot of Studio Ghibli, all of the characters have a different, different way, different eccentric behavior, I suppose. Ingemar's uncle works in a glass factory, so he blows glass containers. And there's a few characters in there. There's one character who likes to ride his unicycle on a tightrope. There's a grandfather of one of the boys who builds a spaceship for the boys to ride in that's on a zip line. And the grandfather has a big pool of water that seems to have some chemicals in, because some of the kids go for swims in this big barrel of water and their hair turns green. And there's another character who's always repairing his roof and hammering at all times of day and night. He ends up falling off the roof at some point and then going and, stripping off his clothes and bathing in the freezing water in the middle of all the ice. So there's all sorts of little vignettes describing Ingemar's life and all of the events that lead him to grow up and act a bit more grown up, I suppose. So lots of beautiful countryside, steam trains, machines, inventions, lots of references to dogs in this film. It is, after all, called My Life as a Dog. And Ingemar, like I said, is fixated on the tragic fate of Laika, the Russian space dog. But he behaves like a dog himself at times, barking and running around on all fours. And he really is being treated like a dog in some way, just like something that can be ordered around and subject to the whims of adults and without any independence of his own. So that sort of describes his life. Now, it is a great movie. I really enjoyed it. On the rewatch, I'd probably 4.5 stars, 4 stars, probably 4.5 stars. I would say it is a Mintox. It is a bit of a classic for me, remembering back watching it in the early 90s. And I really enjoyed it much more than I expected to on the rewatch. Now, apart from Kurt Vonnegut and a lot of directors and movie critics loving this movie, on a creepy note, Michael Jackson, this was his favourite movie. And of course, he made contact with its child star, Anton Glasnesius. Sorry, I can't pronounce his name. And took him to an amusement park in Sweden, and then got to visit Michael Jackson in America. So all sorts of Macaulay Culkin vibes going on there. Probably not surprising that Anton decided he did not want to continue his acting career. He tried to become a professional footballer, but had to give that up in his early 20s due to knee injuries, and later became a TV producer. So that's about all I have for My Life as a Dog. It is a good movie. I'd catch it if you get a chance to. But now,
I'm driving along and I'm just singing my song. I'm in a news-free zone.
Welcome to the News Free Zone, everybody. It's that time of the podcast where we look back at the news from 40 years ago so that we don't have to look at the news from 2025. But I'm going to break the rules. I'm going to look at some news from 2025. I do this occasionally when there's a little moment of serendipity. And this week we did get such a moment because we have been talking about new Coke and high fructose corn syrup and all sorts of things like that, because that happened in 1985. The Coca-Cola Company introduced new Coke with high fructose corn syrup replacing cane sugar in the original Coke, and later on they reintroduced original Coke, labeling it Coke Classic. But now Coke Classic contained high fructose corn syrup and not cane sugar. This week in 2025, Donald Trump, the President of the United States, claimed that the Coca-Cola Company had convinced them to switch back to using sugarcane in its drinks, just like they do in Mexico and the UK and Australia and all sorts of other countries. But the Coca-Cola Company revealed that this was not actually true, and they will continue to use high fructose corn syrup. So someone in the Trump administration is reading Usenet from 1985, I think. Anyway, let's go to the actual news from 1985. So this week, the Vice President of the United States, George H.W. Bush, announced Krista McAuliffe would be selected as the first teacher to fly in space. Now, of course, we all know what would eventually happen 6 months from now with the Challenger disaster. But she was a 37-year-old social studies teacher from Concord, New Hampshire, beating 11,000 other applicants for NASA's Teacher in Space project. So that would all end on a grim note. This week also marked a revolution in gaming when Sega released the Hang-On arcade machine into North America arcades. This was the first motion-controlled game where you actually physically sat on a motorbike and leaned to turn corners. George Romero this week unleashed Day of the Dead on audiences. Now, I'm not doing horror movies, not really. We have done a few quasi-horror movies in the movies of 1999, but there's quite a lot released in 1985 that I've skipped over. But this came out this week, a $3.5 million zombie epic featuring groundbreaking effects and introducing Bub, cinema's first intelligent zombie. Not a movie that I've seen before. I know some listeners would be interested in watching that, but it didn't do very well at the box office because it was absolutely crushed by Back to the Future's third weekend of release, which was really a big release. But in the years since, of course, Day of the Dead has become a cult classic. Now, over in South Africa, the president has declared a state of emergency with the apartheid regime attempting to crush black resistance and all sorts of horrible things going on over there, with thousands of people detained and international condemnation intensifying. So this was really the moment where historians mark this week as the beginning of the end of apartheid in South Africa. Also in Egypt, there was a failed bombing attempt on the US embassy. Now, this is a bit of a serendipity with Back to the Future being in the cinemas because it was Libyan terrorists trying to bomb the US embassy, and the Libyan terrorists in Back to the Future, I think, trying to get back the, the substance that they're going to use to make a bomb. Now, let's go over to Usenet. Of course, I read Usenet on a 40-year delay. You can too if you go to olduse.net in your web browser. Over on net.micro, people are talking about having computers in the kitchen because all kitchen catalogues and home catalogues, all these glossy brochures nowadays show computers prominently in the kitchen as part of the kitchen. presumably so you can look at a recipe while you're cooking. And people are just asking, is anybody doing this in real life? Now, a user called Rob Warnock replies that, well, he doesn't have a computer in the kitchen, but he does have a terminal in the den. And his home has a bit of an open layout where there's a kitchen and a den opposite the kitchen, which is where the TV is. And he described what he does. He watches TV while he's cooking, and then he goes and sits in the den, watches TV while eating, but surfing the Usenet on the terminal during the ad breaks. So this is how some people were living in 1985. Quite lucky to have a terminal in the den in 1985 with a network connection. I think the Usenet group net.misc.coke was created this week because there's so much discussion about Coke that it warranted a whole news group of its own. Net.movies is just wall-to-wall, Back to the Future, and net.music is wall-to-the-wall Live Aid talk. But I haven't found a single post where anybody mentioned the performance by Queen at Wembley Arena, which of course has become a classic, as I mentioned last week. But nobody has mentioned it. They've mentioned plenty of other bands that performed in the UK part of Live Aid, but nobody's talked about Queen. I wonder why. Now, I did want to quickly go back to Pepys Diary, which I do from time to time. So this week, London is absolutely in the middle of the plague, the Black Plague, with the death toll hitting 1,089 plague victims for the week, which is a lot when you consider London was under 1 million people at the time. I'm not sure how much it was, a few 100,000 perhaps, but the sickness, as Pepys wrote, the sickness was almost everywhere. And Lady Carteret gifts Pepys a bottle of plague water, which is an alcoholic herbal concoction advertised as an antidote against the plague, prepared by eminent physicians in the great year of contagion, 1625. So there you go, just to put things in a bit of perspective. Anyway, I'll see you all back here next week where we'll be spinning the bingo machine and watching a different movie from 1985. And until then, please don't forget to rewind.